Dear brothers and sisters, I stand before you today to address a topic that has been on my heart for some time: sin in the modern world. As we look around us, we see a world that is plagued by sin and its consequences. From greed to lust, from envy to pride, from wrath to sloth, we see the effects of sin in every aspect of our lives. The problem with sin is that it is often subtle and insidious. It creeps into our lives in ways that we may not even recognize, and it can lead us down a path of destruction if we are not careful. The modern world is particularly susceptible to sin, with its focus on individualism, materialism, and instant gratification. One of the most insidious forms of sin in the modern world is greed. We live in a society that is obsessed with wealth and material possessions, and this obsession has led to a culture of greed and selfishness. We see this in the way that people accumulate wealth at the expense of others, in the way that corporations prioritize profits over people, and in the way that governments prioritize the interests of the wealthy over the needs of the poor. Another form of sin that is particularly prevalent in the modern world is lust. We live in a society that is hypersexualized, with sexual imagery and messages bombarding us from every angle. This constant exposure to sexual content has led to a culture of promiscuity and objectification, where people are valued for their sexual appeal, rather than their character or their accomplishments. Envy is another form of sin that is rampant in the modern world. Social media has created a culture of comparison, where people are constantly comparing themselves to others and feeling inadequate as a result. This envy can lead to feelings of bitterness, resentment, and even hatred towards others. Pride is another form of sin that is particularly insidious in the modern world. We live in a culture that values individualism and self-promotion, and this can lead to a culture of pride and arrogance. People are encouraged to put themselves first, to pursue their own interests at the expense of others, and to seek recognition and acclaim for their accomplishments. Wrath is another form of sin that is prevalent in the modern world. We see this in the way that people lash out at each other on social media, in the way that people resort to violence to solve their problems, and in the way that governments use military force to achieve their objectives. Finally, sloth is a form of sin that is particularly problematic in the modern world. We live in a society that is obsessed with convenience and instant gratification, and this has led to a culture of laziness and apathy. People are encouraged to take shortcuts, to avoid hard work, and to prioritize leisure over productivity. So what can we do about this? How can we combat sin in the modern world? The answer lies in our faith and our values. We must turn to God and seek His guidance in our lives. We must recognize the importance of humility, compassion, and service to others. We must prioritize our relationships with others over our own desires and interests. We must also work to create a culture that values these same virtues. We must work to create a society that is built on the principles of justice, equality, and compassion. We must advocate for policies that prioritize the needs of the poor and the vulnerable over the interests of the wealthy and the powerful. We must also be willing to make sacrifices in our own lives. We must be willing to give up our own desires and interests for the sake of others. We must be willing to work hard, to persevere through difficult times, and to resist the temptations of sin, the temptations of